Hi, I'm John Knoll, software trainer for Adobe, and in this video I'll be talking all about editing in Premiere Pro, and this is geared specifically towards editors coming from Avid Media Composer. Now, switching between the different software can be really difficult, especially when you find that your muscle memory from one NLE does not apply to the other very easily. It's almost like learning a new language. Don't worry, I'm here to help. One of the first things we need to talk about are the differences in terminology between the two programs. In Avid, you work in bins. Bins contain all of your footage and sequences, and you sort that inside the bin typically in folders. A collection of bins is called a project. But in Premiere Pro, things are a little bit different. What you would call a bin in Avid is called a project in Premiere Pro. A bin in Premiere Pro is definitely not the same as a bin in Avid. It's a folder inside a Premiere Pro project that can hold media or sequences or whatever you want to put in there, but it does not exist at the desktop level the way that bins do in Avid. They're only inside the project file. And a collection of project files that can be used in a collaborative environment is known as a production. This is often one of the hardest things for Avid editors to wrap their heads around as they're moving into Premiere Pro, and little things like the difference in terminology between project and bin can get a little confusing. Whenever you hear project in Premiere Pro, just try to think of bin in Avid land. They're the same thing. Now let's talk about the difference in project settings. In Avid, you set up an overall project with a specific frame rate and frame size, and all the sequences you create will be locked into that unless you decide to change it. But in Premiere Pro, it's more open. We don't have to lock ourselves into anything, and a Premiere Pro project can contain multiple sequences at different sizes and different frame rates. Let me show you where to change the settings in Premiere. If you go to File, Production Settings, or Project Settings, I'm in a production right now, so this would say Project Settings if it was a standalone project. And here under General, you'll see there's nothing there that talks about frame rate or frame size, aspect ratio, audio. All it is how you display your timecode, how to display your audio, and some settings there for custom title and action safe. There's some options there for how you want to view your color, and then scratch disks and ingest, which is not available in a production. And that's it. You don't have to set a frame rate or frame size here. In these project settings, you can decide that on a sequence by sequence basis once you start a Premiere Pro project. So I can go in here to my project panel, create a new sequence, and this first one can be a regular HD 1080p sequence at 23976, and I'll just label that really quick there. Hit OK, and then right away I can also create another sequence that is 4K HDR at the same frame rate. And both those sequences can be inside the same Premiere Pro project, which again is like a bin in Avid. Now, obviously, the interface in Premiere Pro is different than Avid, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to that, but it does feature some of the same customization that you're used to in Avid. You can move panels around, put them in different places, and also float panels if you'd like, and to have them as free-floating windows instead of just docked like everything else. Premiere Pro is built on a system of docked panels. If you move them around, they'll each dock, and each panel group here will move together when you change the width, like so. Everything just kind of snaps around. It's very elastic. If you prefer more of the floating panel style from Avid, you can click on the hamburger menu next to the name of any of the panels and choose to undock. So now my project panel is undocked, and I can move that around, put that where I would like it, and I can even move that to a second monitor and make it full screen over there. If you get a configuration of panels that you like, you can go under Window, Workspace, and save as a new workspace, and then your set of custom panel configurations will be saved. You can even assign a keyboard shortcut to it and go back to it at any time. And if you spend a little bit of time moving things around, you may be able to get something that is close to an Avid configuration. This isn't exactly like an Avid workspace, but it's pretty darn close. We've got the toolbar here across the center. We have horizontal audio meters, nice wide timeline, source, program, and some of the room options over here on the right that take us to color and sound, for example. And the project panel, which again is like the bin in Avid, is docked up here in the upper right, and you can tear that off and put that somewhere else if you would prefer. Now let's talk about the timeline panel, because that's where you're going to be doing the majority of your work in Premiere Pro. Here I have a sequence open in the timeline panel, and you'll notice there's obviously a few key differences here. First and foremost, we don't have the timecode bar at the bottom of the panel like we do in Avid. And we also don't have source and record side buttons. It may look that way, but this left side here are source patches from the source monitor here. I see I have a clip loaded that has no audio, so there is no patch here for the audio side. If I do load a clip that does have audio in it, you'll see that you have a patch there for the audio, and you can move that around accordingly. But this other column here next to the locks is not the record side. That's something else called targeting, and I'll explain targeting in a moment. But essentially, targeting affects clips once they're already on the timeline, and the left side, the source patching, affects clips when they're brought in from the source monitor. But there is no record toggle in Premiere Pro. And the other thing you'll notice is that there are track names here. You see I've named my audio tracks, dialogue 1, 2, sound effects, music, so on. But when they're at their default height, those are hidden. So one thing I recommend is to spend some time customizing the interface, and that includes the audio headers here. When the tracks are this skinny, you will not see the labels. So right click here in this gray area and go to Customize. And there you have a little browser where you can pull in different buttons and pull out the buttons that you don't want. For example, I rarely do voiceover recording directly into my timeline. I'm going to grab that microphone and pull it out. Sometimes you have to reset. Here we go. And there we go. The microphone has been pulled out, and I can see the track label over here. I'll pull that in to the right. And I'll move the sync lock down to the middle. The sync lock isn't super important for the way that I like to edit, and I don't want to accidentally click the sync lock and throw something out of sync. Now that I have this modified audio track header, if I do want to see the sync lock or other icons that I load here in the center, I just need to open it up by double clicking, and shift double click opens all of them to the same height or closes them down. But now that the track name has been moved over to the right here, I can see it even though these tracks are at their minimal height. And the same thing up here for video tracks. There's less options when you customize these. So we can pull that sync lock down like we did before, and we can move the track name up to that higher level. And now if I want to label my video tracks, I can do that as well. And the sync locks, again, are hidden until I pop that track wide open. Now, while we're talking about the interface, let's talk about the keyboard shortcuts. I go here under the Premiere Pro menu or the File menu on Windows. Premiere Pro is available on Mac, and you see there is the keyboard shortcuts. This is the keyboard shortcuts viewer, and you assign shortcuts down here on the left. You look and see what shortcuts are available that don't already have a keyboard shortcut assigned, or if there is one, you can decide if you like that or not and just exit out and assign it to a new key. And you can do that just by dragging and dropping over an available key like so. And then if you click on that key over here on the right, you'll see everything that's been assigned to it, including any modifier keys. Now this is my custom layout here. You can also pull up the Avid Media Composer shortcut layout, which ships with Premiere Pro. This is an older version for now. There may be a newer version coming in the software that's a more up-to-date version of Media Composer, but this at least will get you started from a base that you're used to. And you can build from there. And again, just find the shortcut you want over here on the left-hand side and drag and drop it over an available key. And if you have a full-size keyboard, the number pad and plus and minus keys over here on the right are also available. Now, when it comes to editing, Premiere Pro is very flexible. If you prefer to use the source monitor and rely on in and out points on the timeline, no problem. You can cut that way all day. If you would want to just drag from the source monitor to the timeline, you can do that. You can drag directly from the bins if you want to. If you prefer to use keyboard shortcuts for all your editing and trimming, you can do that, or you can just use the mouse. Any way you want to work, Premiere Pro can accommodate you. All right, I've got a sequence here. I'm starting to assemble this short film. I already have a few clips on the timeline, and I need to add this shot of the office building prior to these clips here. So going up to the source monitor, I just double clicked on that shot down here in my bin. And again, a bin in Premiere Pro is the same as a folder in Avid. It's just a way to collect all the footage here. All of my shots here are in this bin marked editing project over time media. And I loaded that up here, and I'll just set a few quick in and out points. I want to get past the little traffic shots there. Yeah, just so those cars clear the shot. And I'll just use my keyboard shortcut I to set an in point and scrub down here just after the shot kind of lands, and I'll set an out point. In this case, I'll use the bracket instead down below in the transport controls. Either way will get me there. I could also use the O key as the keyboard shortcut. Now down here on the timeline, I'm going to go ahead and put an in point here, and I'll put an out point right next to that clip. So it's going to drop right in there with no gap. And I can choose either insert or overwrite. I have keyboard shortcuts assigned there, or I can just use the handy little buttons down here at the bottom of the source window. I'm just going to choose overwrite, and I get this fit clip dialog box. Basically, something is not the same length, and the source is longer than the destination. So this box will always pop up and just ask you what you'd like to do. You can change the speed. You can ignore either in point or either out point. In this case, I kind of like where that shot started, so I'm going to ignore the sequence in point so that the length of the shot that goes into the timeline is the length that I chose up here in the source monitor. And if I want to always do that, I can click this box here, and this fit clip dialog box will not pop up in the future, and it will always respect whatever choice I just made. If I want to have maximum flexibility, I will not check that now so that I always get this fit clip option. By the way, if you do choose always use this choice and you regret that later, no problem. There's a setting in the preferences to restore this box. Okay, there we are. So that just dropped onto the timeline right there. And as I mentioned, there's different ways to do that. I just use in and out points and an insert command very quickly. I'm going to select that clip and delete it. I can also just have dragged and dropped like so and pulled it in. There's a little bit of magnetic snapping here that happens on the timeline. The option for this is the snap button, which is the little magnet up here. There's also a keyboard shortcut to disable that. I have it mapped to N and turn that on or off. And when the snapping is on, the clips will get close to each other and immediately snap together. You can still pull and do an overwrite. It just takes a little more force to do that. And I mentioned you don't have to even pull in from the source monitor. Here's that clip down here in the bin. Notice if I scrub over it, I get a view of the shot, and you'll see there's a little blue line in there. It respects the in and out points that were previously set up here in the source window. So if I pull it from the bin, it's going to be the same length that I had set up here. All right, I'm going to keep editing this short film here. By the way, I have all my clips arranged here in icon view so I can see them nice and big. There is also a list view down here in this bin, or I should say folder, and I can go back and forth like so, and I can change the sort order with that little drop down right there. Right now they're just in sort of a random user order. If I change that to name, that will be alphabetical, and these are labeled with their shot number and take, which is really helpful. And I can use this slider to increase the preview size of that thumbnail like so. And incidentally, there is a shortcut if you use the Premiere Pro defaults. It is the tilde key, which is below the escape key in the upper left hand corner of the keyboard. That will pop any active panel full screen, and you can toggle back and forth. There's the timeline if I just want to see it by itself, or one of the viewers. There's source and program. In this case, I want to look at the project bin here, which is full of all my clips, and I want to find that first shot, which is, let's see, where is it? There it is, right there. Okay, I want 651. That looks good. I'm going to double click that. That's going to take me out of that view and load it into the source viewer. By the way, you can also drag and drop clips into the source viewer from here if you'd like. Otherwise, just double click. So I want to bring this down onto the timeline. I'll set a quick in point over here. Now, this is where the track patching may come into play. Right now, the video is going to come in on V1 and the audio is going to come in on A1. And those are assigned to dialogue, and there is dialogue in this scene. But maybe I want this on the second dialogue track. I want that to be on A2. Notice I just pulled down the patch over here on the left-hand side. Again, this column here next to it, those are targets. They're not the record side. So that's not going to matter in this case. In fact, I can turn those off and it won't have any bearing on what's going to happen next, which is that this shot is going to come in on V1 and A2. I just did a quick insert. I'll just zoom out a little bit. There we go. Now if I had, I'll hit undo. If I had moved that back to A1, that's where it were to come in. Oh, and I forgot, there was actually a shot that was supposed to be in between this paper shredder shot here, and before our hero comes into the scene, he's supposed to pick up a set of keys. I think it's labeled keys, so I can go to this little search bar, which is at the top of every bin, and I can just type in the word keys, and if it finds a match, it's only going to narrow it down to the matching shot. So I'll load that into my source monitor and take a quick look. Yeah, there we go. That's a quick, fast insert of him grabbing his car keys on the way home. Let's just start it there, and we're out. Great. So I'll just move the playhead in between the paper shredder clip here and him entering the scene, and I'll just do a quick insert. And again, that's going to go on V1 and A1, but I think there's some audio here which may give me the sound effects that I want. I'll just click on that. No, there's no audio there at all. I just clicked on the little waveform button at the bottom here of the source panel. That gives me a quick way to look at the audio and the video separately on a shot. I'm going to go back and match frame this one to show you the difference. Here's a shot with audio. That's one mono track there. And you can flip back and forth by clicking on the little film strip icon versus the audio. Incidentally, this gives you the ability to drag just the audio or the video to the timeline, regardless of what the patching is on the left side here. So if I just grab that little waveform icon and pull it down, I will only get the audio. Or if I grab the film strip icon and pull that, I will only get the video. Let me go back to that key shot. There it is. Flip it back to the video view there. Great. So I want that, but there's no sound really associated with that clip that I need. So I'll turn off the patch for A1 and I'll put the playhead between those two shots and I'll do a quick insert, and that just pushes everything down. Zoom in. There we go. All right, I want to add this next shot here. Here's the boss that steps in the way, blocks our hero from leaving the office. And I want to play this in to out. I already have the in and out point set. I want to play that back real quick for myself just to make sure it's correct. There is a keyboard shortcut to play in to out, but there's also a button we can add to this button bar here in the source monitor. So we go to our button editor, and right up here, play video in to out. I'm going to go ahead and just drag that down over here, hit OK, and now I can just play back.
Whoa, what's the big rush?
All right, so he's saying, whoa, what's the big rush? And we also hear that dialogue down here in this shot.
Whoa, what's the big rush?
Nothing.
And I want to line those up. So I'm going to set my in and out point right here. And I'm going to drop that into a higher track and a lower audio track, and then try to align those. And I'll go ahead and put a marker here on this clip where he says, whoa.
Whoa, what's the...
All right, so it's right there. And I'm going to hit M, which is my keyboard shortcut for marker. There's also a button right here for add marker, and there's another button I already have in the program monitor as well for adding a marker. If you select a clip, you add a marker to that clip. If you don't have a clip selected and you hit marker, you will add a marker to the timeline. So there's two different things there. There's a timeline marker and a clip marker, and they are separate just depending on which one you select. So I've got it in both places, and I'm going to go ahead and find that same line of dialogue here in the source monitor. I'm going to click on the audio and zoom in a little bit. Just by sliding these wheels, I can get really nice and close to the waveform. And if you want to make the waveform bigger or smaller, there's also little wheels over here on the right. You can pull those in and out like so to make that waveform nice and tall. I'm not affecting the gain or the volume here. This is just visually making the waveform larger so I can line up this edit.
Whoa.
Okay, so that's the whoa, and I'm gonna hit another marker right there with my M key. And now I need to get my patching correct on the timeline, so I want to put that on V2. So I'm going to grab the source patch for the video here and move it up one position. So that's going to come in on V2. And I'm going to activate the audio, which I want, and I'm going to move that down to A2 like so. And I'm going to do an overwrite edit to drop that on top of the clips there. And again, I have this dialog box pop up. So I'm going to ignore the sequence out point in this case because the source in and out point is what I want. And there we go. And I'm going to quickly line those up. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Like so. And then we're just going to line up the markers. I just select my clip and I drag it like so. There's also a keyboard shortcut for going a frame at a time, like so. On the Mac, I'm holding down the Option key, and on Windows, I would hold down the Alt key. And then there are keyboard shortcuts for move forward and backward by 1 frame. Mine's mapped to my period and my comma, so I can also select that clip and use the keyboard to move it into position like so. Or I can just grab it with the mouse and pull it. And actually, I'll get a little indicator there where all the markers are now aligned. So I'll let go and play it back.
Whoa, what's the big rush? What's the big rush?
All right, so have to deal with that dialogue there now. We have the whoa in the right place, but the what's the big rush is in the wrong place. So I need to do some trimming. But first I want to get this entrance correct. I still want to see the hero who was on A1 and V1 before I see the boss here who is on V2. So I think we'll cut to him right about there. So I need to shorten this left edge of the boss's clip to that position. And as I mentioned before, there's different ways to do this in Premiere Pro. I can use the keyboard, I can use the mouse. It's whatever way I'm the most comfortable with. Let me show you the options. So if I just select the head of that clip, I can just pull it to the right. I'm just going to drag it right to that marker and let go.
Whoa, what's the big rush?
All right, pull it back to where it was. And notice when I select that edit point, this is a roll edit. When you see red, that's roll, and the icon turns into this right arrow facing roll tool with a red bracket. And just with the regular selection tool over here in the toolbar, that's what you get when you click on an edit point like that. It'll be a roll. You can also do this little trick here. If I align the playhead with that marker, select the edit point, and there's a keyboard shortcut to extend edit to the playhead. I have mine mapped to E for extend. And again, you'll find this in your keyboard shortcuts. Extend edit to the playhead. And that's just going to pop the end of that clip right to where I parked the playhead, which was over those markers, like so. I could have set an in and out point if I wanted to and just shaved off the front of this clip. That seems like kind of a long way to go, but I could do something like this. Let's say there's the out point, here's the in point, and the duration of that was 22 frames over here according to my in and out duration. I could actually click on that edit point, and then using the full number keypad over here on my extended keyboard, I can hit the plus key, and you'll see that the timecode window is now highlighted there on the timeline panel. I can type in 22 frames and hit enter. That would also have moved the start point, the end point of that clip ahead 22 frames. And I had to set the in and out point to determine that length, but that's just another way to get there. Or I can also just remove that section of the timeline by using a lift. So I can do a lift edit there, but notice nothing happens. I have the in and out point selected, but lift is not doing anything. Why isn't it doing anything? Well, this is where those track targets come into play. Remember I mentioned that this column here on the right side of the locks, it's not the record side like it is in Avid. This is called the track targets, and they affect clips once they're already on the timeline. So watch what happens now. If I target V2 and A2, and then I'll do the lift, that also chopped out that clip in that section. So the targeting affects things that are already on the timeline, and whatever edits you do with the lift or extract command will remove it, but only from the tracks that were targeted. If I targeted V1 and A1 and did the same lift, notice that they all come out. So I just used several different methods to get this edit point to where I wanted it.
Whoa, what's the big rush? What's the big one?
And I think I want to get out of that shot to focus on his reaction. I want to find that reaction shot of my hero here, but I've covered it up with this clip. I can turn off track 2, I'll just turn off the eyeball. Or I can just temporarily disable this clip by right-clicking on it and hitting the enable function. This kind of does the same thing, but you notice the clip is grayed out, and if anything else was on the same track, it would still be visible. So it's like an individual mute for this clip. So where does he... All right, there's a good reaction right about there. So I think I want to end this clip right in that spot, and I can obviously just click on this end of the clip here. I could do that extend edit function, which will go the other direction because I had the playhead right where I wanted it. Or I could choose to add an edit point here and kind of blade this clip right in that spot and delete the other part that I don't need. And in this case, I'm going to use the razor tool, which is kind of a really old school way of doing it. And I click on that clip. Notice, again, it respects the track targeting. It did not razor blade through V1 or A1. It only did V2 and A2 because the targets were on for those clips. Let me hit undo real quick. There's a keyboard shortcut, which I tend to use, which is faster than going to the old-fashioned razor blade tool there, which is add edit. And again, you'll find that in the keyboard shortcuts, add edit, and that puts an edit point right there. And I'm going to move the playhead down, and I'm just going to drag a little bit of this clip out of the way. There's this other line of dialogue. I may want to come back to that clip here. So I'm just going to keep it parked there, and I'm going to select this portion of it that we left behind, right-click on it, and re-enable it so I can see it. And I've decided I'm just going to keep one of those audio woes that was in there. And for consistency, I'm going to use the take that also included the hero dialogue. It's just kind of a mix down of both of their microphones here. So I'm going to select the audio from this clip here and disable it. Now, there's a few different ways I can do that to basically decouple the audio from the video, because if I select it right now and hit the delete key, they're both going to disappear on me. So I don't want that. Let me hit undo. So how do we disengage our audio from our video? There's a few different ways. Over here at the top of the timeline panel, you can see this button here is called linked selection. Now, if I turn that off, all the clips that were previously linked together will now be unlinked. They still are linked together. If I turn the switch back on, you can see that they are indeed still linked together, but by throwing the switch, they temporarily are unlinked, and I could use that to quickly select the audio and remove it. Let me hit undo. But that's an extra click, and I don't want to do that. Now I've got a keyboard shortcut I can use to just select the video or the audio without having to turn off this linked selection switch here, and that is to hold down the Option or Alt key, like so, and then I can hit delete. And if I just wanted to unlink the clips, since I'm not going to come back to this audio probably, I can always just select the clip, right-click on it, and choose this unlink function here, and now they are fully separated from each other. I can select the audio and delete that. All right, let me show you all of the available tools for editing in Premiere Pro. I've got the toolbar here. You can move it so that it's horizontal, more like the Avid toolbar, but you can't change the appearance or add tools to this. But there are more tools than are readily visible. If you see this little white dot in the bottom right-hand corner of a tool, that means there are other tools docked underneath it. So it's a little flyout menu. You just click and hold, or use the keyboard shortcuts assigned to those tools to get to them directly. So I'm going to focus on this top group here. The rest of these are for things like graphics. First of all, we just have the basic selection tool. If you grab an edit point or even hover near it, you'll notice that it turns into a single-sided roll. Red, again, is for roll, and there's a single arrow pointing left or right. And if I just click and drag, you see I'm rolling to the right, or I can roll the other way until I run out of media. And below that, we have the ripple tool first and foremost. A ripple edit is indicated by yellow instead of red, and if I were to ripple that way, you notice that the endpoint, or at least the location in the timeline where that clip started, stays the same, but we're cutting into the clip in a ripple. I can pull it out the other direction, and same thing, it's going to stay at the same time code there on the timeline, but we're adding to the head of the clip till we run out of media. Now here we have the rolling edit tool. This goes in both directions here. I'm going to quickly delete the gap between these two clips. I can actually select that empty area and just hit the delete key to remove the gap. And you'll see if I select the rolling edit tool and click on the edit point between those two clips, I can shift the out point of the first clip and then the in point of the second clip without moving either of them in time. And you see I get a pop-up window up there in the program monitor where I can see the new in point and out point that's going to be determined there. I mentioned the snap to playhead option, which I have mapped to the E tool. When you have an edit point selected with a particular tool and you use that extend edit to playhead function, like so, it's going to respect the tool type that you chose. So there it did a roll edit. And if I did the same thing but with the ripple tool, I'll move the playhead here and I will select a ripple to the right and extend edit. In this case, because it rippled, it actually moved the playhead along with it, but it did chop off the beginning of this clip. It did a ripple edit and shifted it down. Now the other tools in this fly up menu are for speed and remix. This rate stretch tool here will change the speed of a clip based on the length that you drag it to. That's for visually just changing the speed by dragging it out. You could also always right click and go to speed and duration and type it in, and you could choose to change the duration and also do a ripple edit and shift clips as you change speed. Remix is for music, and that is part of the audio lesson. If you look through these videos on the portal here, you'll find a lesson on audio, and I cover remixing in there. Now below that we have the option to slip or slide. Slip is obviously moving the footage that is inside that clip. And you know what? Let me just go and reset that speed since I've messed it up there. Change that back to 100%. There we go. And when I do that slip, it's just changing what is inside that clip without changing the length, but changing the in and out point inside that length. And then the slide tool will move the clip in time. And let me just go ahead and bring in another quick clip here. It could be anything. Let's just drag in this little shot here, drag it down, put it between those two, and I'm going to use the slide tool instead of the slip tool. And the slide tool will adjust the position of that clip without changing the overall length of any of the other clips. Next to that, we have the track select tool. This is a handy little tool for just grabbing everything past the point where you click in the timeline. So if I click here, it's only going to grab those two clips. But if I click back here at the beginning, I'm going to grab everything. There's also another tool underneath that for going the other direction. I can click here and only select what was to the left instead of the right. And there's a shortcut there. Go back to track select forward. If you hold down the shift key, notice that it changes to one arrow and you can just select one track at a time. This is useful for things that are on multiple tracks. So see if I grab it there, I'm only selecting the clips that were on video 2 and any linked audio that was on A2, or if I do this down here, I'm only selecting the clips that were on V1 and A1. And then of course we have our friend the razor blade, which I don't use that often anymore because it means changing tools, but you can use the add edit function to essentially do the same thing. I have that hotkeyed to Y, and that will blade through the clips you select, and it will respect the track targets over here. So if something is not targeted and you go to add edit, nothing will happen. Now, in addition to the tools, there are many commands in Premiere Pro for editing and trimming on the timeline, and I'm going to cover all of them very, very briefly. But in order to set them up, you're going to want to check them out in the keyboard shortcuts. I highly recommend you search for the terms trim, and you'll see all the options available there for trimming, as well as edit, and you'll find some options in there worth assigning a keyboard shortcut to. There are many commands in the program, and I'll go through them really quickly here. I already mentioned the add edit function, which I have mapped to Y again, which will simply blade a clip. You can also add edit to all tracks simultaneously by selecting Shift Y, or in this case Shift add edit, and that's going to blade through all the tracks simultaneously. You can extend an edit to the playhead, as I mentioned, by clicking on the edit point and hitting the extend edit key there. Now this one is really important if you are used to editing with keyboard shortcuts, let me zoom in a little bit here, and you like to keep your hands on the keyboard and you don't want to have to go to the toolbar to shift tools or use the other keyboard shortcut there. You just want to toggle a different type of edit right here. So you see I selected this edit point and it is a roll to the right. There's a key for toggling the trim type. And you'll see it's shifting from roll right to a double roll to a ripple left, ripple right, and back to a roll left. So very quickly you can toggle through all the different trim types right there. And you can select multiples. So by holding down the shift key and selecting a second edit point there, I can change them all. So I'm going to change those to a ripple to the left here, and there are keyboard shortcuts just to trim backwards or forwards 1 frame at a time. And this is just called trim backward or trim forward. And if you want it to go a little bit faster, there's trim forward and trim backward many, which will go at a fixed increment, which you can set up here in the timeline trim settings in the preferences. Large trim offset is what that is called. Right now mine is set to 5 frames. Now in Premiere Pro, you can use the playhead a lot to ripple and roll your trims into position, and there are keyboard shortcuts for that. I'm going to position my playhead here at this section of the clip, and I want to chop off the right edge, which I could do if I selected that edit point and just pulled in or use the extend edit, but that's a few extra clicks, and without even selecting the edit point I can do this. That is a ripple trim next edit to playhead, and I have that mapped to the W button, which is part of the Premiere Pro defaults. If I'm coming from the other direction, I want to chop off the head of this clip and ripple trim it so there's no gap between that and the other clip here. I'll go the other direction, and that's ripple trim previous edit to playhead. That's mapped to Q on my keyboard. And again, Q and W are part of the default Premiere Pro keyboard shortcuts. If you don't have those, I highly recommend adding them. And there's a roll variation on that as well. Let me just hit undo, and I can hold down the option key instead of just clicking the key. That will do a roll edit as opposed to a ripple. If I do want that gap on either side, I can do that instead. Now here's a few other useful commands in Premiere. I'll mention what keys I have bound them to, but again, that's up to you in the keyboard shortcuts. To my bracket keys here, I can jump to the nearest edit point and select that as an edit in or edit out, and it defaults to a roll. So depending on where the playhead is, it's going to find the nearest edit point. And you notice that it keeps selecting as I go, so I can do that to select multiple edit points. There's also a keyboard shortcut to automatically select all the edit points in a selection. I'm going to hold down the Command key on the Mac. This will be the Control key on Windows, and I'm just going to lasso all these clips. Normally when you lasso like this, you select just the clips, but in this case, I'm grabbing the edit points all in one shot, and anything I do there will affect every edit point. And I can use my other modifiers that we've already covered here, like change the type of edit there on all of them simultaneously. All right, and you see that that popped up a new window up here. This is called the trim window. I'll cover that in a moment. There's also an option to show through edits. You'll see there's a little butterfly stitch there. A through edit is essentially telling you there's no timecode break. We cut this clip here, but there's no missing footage in between. So if I wanted to, I could rejoin those. I can right click there and join through edit, and that removes that edit point. And finally, you can do edits using timecode. I'm going to select this edit point right here on this clip that's on the upper track, and I'm going to move it 10 frames to the left. So I can type in -10 here on the numeric keypad. Notice that the timecode display reflects the -10 frames. Hit enter, and it has just shifted. I can move it a full second back to the left by typing in -1 and then a period, which is a shortcut for getting me to 1 second. There we go. And I can do 5 seconds, -5, a period. There we go. I can go the other direction just by using the plus key. So let me show you how to use a few of these tools and commands on a sequence edit here. I've got another version of my short film. I've started assembling everything. I've got some sound effects now for this paper shredder. And then I have this scene here between the two guys. Let me zoom back out a little bit here and just hit play.
Oh, what's the big rush?
Nothing, just
Big date.
no.
Listen, Ralph. I know you're a private kind of guy.
All right, I want to do some tightening and move some shots around in here and really get this thing on its feet. So I need to take this long pause out here between his two lines. Now sort of the Avid way to do that, right, would be to do a quick in and out and then an extract, which would close the gap. So that's one way we could do that. Let me hit undo. The long way to do it with our tools would be to either use the razor blade or just simply add edit right there at the playhead, select that clip, and we can do a shift delete, which would close the gap as well. We could also drag in this edit point, select the gap, delete it. We could use the ripple tool to also move that in. Oops, let me grab it like so. Or we could use that ripple trim next edit to playhead command, which again I have mapped to W. And that does a ripple trim on the end of that clip from that edit point that was over here on the right to the position of the playhead. So many different ways to get to the same thing. It totally depends on your editing style and whether you prefer the tools, keyboard shortcuts, in and out points with lift and extract, and so on. All right.
No.
Listen, Ralph.
All right, I think I want to take out that little pause there as well, so I can do that again very quickly. I'm using that W key.
No.
Listen.
All right, and I want to do an L cut here or a J cut to where I hear this character talking when he says listen, and then cut to his side profile shot here. In other words, extend the close-up of this character over the listen. Now, we need to decouple the audio from the video. Several different ways to do that. We could turn off this link selection switch here, and then if I grab this edit point, I'm going to switch to the roll tool, the double roller. That way I'm not changing the overall length of anything, but I am changing the out point of this clip to cover the listen. So that's one way to go. The shorter way to do that without having to turn off linked selection is simply to hold down the option key. If I select this clip with the roller, because the audio and video are linked, I'm getting both sides there, the audio and the video. But if I hold down the option key and click, now I've got just the video side of things, and I can use that in conjunction with the extend edit to playhead command, which is just going to move the edit point to where I have the playhead.
Big date.
No.
Listen, Ralph. I know you're a private kind of guy, and I respect.
And I'll just do that a little bit here. Again, option click, and I'll use the forward button just to, rather than use the playhead, I'll just use the trim forward and backward by 1 frame just to move that shot a little forward in time. Just give me a little more of that side profile there before I cut to his over the shoulder.
I know you're a private kind of guy, and I respect.
All right, so you can see I can use all the different combinations there of selecting edit points, using the playhead, using the keyboard shortcuts and the trim commands. You may be able to get it down to where you don't have to take your hands off the keyboard hardly at all. All right, let's play back a little bit more of our scene here.
Listen, Ralph. I know you're a private kind of guy, and I respect that. But let me give you a little bit of free advice.
All right, I like his performance here, so I don't mind this little pause between dialogue here, but I do want to cover that with another shot. Maybe cut to a close-up of our hero over here. Let's play back what I have loaded here in the source monitor.
Really?
Oh, I kind of like that a little bit. You know what? I'm going to just grab that little bit right there.
Just let me.
Okay. And I'm going to drop that in here. I'm going to put it on V1 and A2. I want to get that little sniffling noise here separate from the other dialogue, but I'm going to go ahead and drop it in the same video track as everything else here. So right there, I'm going to set that up. I'm just going to do an in and an out to kind of cover that gap of silence there, and I'll just do a basic overwrite. Now, again, we will have matching in and out points here. In this case, I'm going to ignore the source out points. I just want to fill this in and out on the timeline very specifically and ignore the source out point. And here we go.
And I respect that. But let me give you a little bit of free advice.
All right, and I think I heard a double sniffle there. I think I heard something in the dialogue track here. So after he's done talking, I can lower the volume there if I want. So I can quickly turn on my volume keyframes there. I had those hidden. So show audio keyframes. I get that white line. I'll just use the pen tool to just kind of drag the volume down. I'll set 4 points. Go back to the selection tool, pull the volume down. So I'm not hearing a double noise there.
And I respect that. But let me give you a little bit of free advice.
All right, and I think I want to put that a little more towards the middle of his shot there, that little sniffle. So I'll use the slip tool, which is right there. I'll select the clip and I'll just drag it to the right. Again, I'm not changing the duration, I'm just changing the in and out point.
Respect that. But let me give you a little bit.
Very nice. So one thing we can't do, unfortunately, is slip a clip by specific amounts using the number pad to dial in with the time code there, but I can use a keyboard shortcut to move it frame by frame, and I just have to have that clip selected with the normal selection tool. If I hold down Option Command and go left and right, you can see I'm slipping it right there in time, moving that little sound around.
And I respect that. But let me give you a little bit of free advice.
All right, looks great. And I'll just do a little L cut there. Just going to grab that again with that tool and move that a little bit to the right using my step forward frame by frame keyboard shortcut.
But let me give you a little bit of free advice.
All right, great. Now, one thing you may have noticed is compared to the Avid, I'm not using anything like trim mode. I haven't slipped into a different mode in order to do these fine cuts and edits on the timeline. In a sense, we're always in trim mode in Premiere Pro. There's no different look for the sequence in order to access those tools. But we do have something called the trim window. If you want to fine tune the edit a little more between two shots, let me just play this back one more time.
But let me give you a little bit of free advice.
All right, I want to change the timing here a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and blade this shot here. The audio, which is currently linked to this other section of the clip, I want to link these two together. They're not linked right now, you know, so if I select them, they're just being selected separately. I'm going to lasso both of those, and I'm going to use the link command. If I right click, it's right there. I also have a keyboard shortcut for that. Okay, now those two pieces are linked together. And if I select this edit point here, like so, and double click it, I will load that edit point into this. This is the trim window. This is the previous clip. This is the clip that I'm on. And you'll notice that when I move my mouse over the middle, I get different tools. Right now it's on roll. All right, and if I click right in the middle, it's the double roll. So it's going to go in both directions here. So any changes that I make in the edit is going to affect both sides of it. Or if I hover over the center there, I can turn that into a ripple. All right, so if I make an edit here, I'll go -1 here on that clip. You see that's moving down like so. It's also affecting track A2 because the sync locks are on and everything is moving to respect that ripple edit. It's going to ripple all the clips together. Or if I go back here and click in the middle, I'm now doing the edits on both sides simultaneously, and I can extend that back out or the other way. This other selection here is the trim forward and trim backward many, and that is set in the preferences as well. Right now that's set to ±5 frames either direction, so just a quick shortcut for that. And because I'm on the roll now, I am not ripple editing the audio here that was on A2. I'm just dealing in here with A1 and V1. If I want to, I could apply a transition there, which I don't want to do. There's a shortcut to apply the transition right there at the bottom. And there is a loop point, so if I just hit playback.
And I respect that. But let me give you a little bit of free advice. Private kind of guy.
All right, so it's going to loop, and I can set that amount in the preferences as well, how far back it pre-rolls before showing me the edit. Now, this editing tool here also respects the J, K, and L tools. So when you use those with the trim window open,
but let me give you a little bit of free advice.
See that? So it's not just moving the playhead in time, it's actually moving the edit point there. And because it's on roll again, it's not affecting that A2 clip. All right, now I want to show you how to do an asymmetrical edit, meaning that one track is going to edit this direction and another track needs to go the opposite direction in order to keep certain shots in place. So here I've got that shredder sound effect underneath all of these shots. All right, and it carries over through that following shot there where he goes to pick up his keys. Added a little fade there using the new fader controls there. And maybe I'll just bring in the end of that clip just a little bit so that it fades out between those two shots. But this initial shot of the shredder is a little too long, and I want to edit it while shifting everything down. So I want to do a ripple edit. So I'll choose the ripple edit tool with my keyboard shortcut, and I will use the step forward and backward command to edit that down by a few frames. But notice that that also created an edit point there on the sound effect, which I don't want. So I'm going to go back in my history palette here to that previous state. What I want to do is shrink the end of this first shredder shot while keeping the sound effect intact. In other words, it has the same out point and it does not add an edit point right there in the center. A few different ways we can do that. We could turn off the sync lock and then that wouldn't move at all, but that would actually affect other clips that are on the same track there. You see I've been a little bit messy. This sound effect is on a track with some dialogue, so I'd want to move that before I tried the sync lock approach, but that's one step too many. I could ripple edit both edges here, so I just held down the shift key and now I'm rippling both of those simultaneously. But that is changing the endpoint of that sound effect, so that's not going to be what I want. So what I can do is actually change the direction of this ripple here on A2. In other words, right now it's rippling to the left. I can make it ripple to the right. Now if I just click, it's going to deselect both those points and only change the edit direction on A2. So I'll go back. There's my ripple left on that first clip of the shredder, and I'm going to hold down the shift key. But this time I'm going to point in the other direction. So before I click with the shift key held down on A2, I'm going to move the mouse so that the arrow points the other way. And now this edit point is rippling to the right and this edit point is rippling to the left. You can also change that. Even if you've selected both like this, you can still hold down the shift key, hover outside of it, and click to the right. And now when I go frame by frame backwards, notice how that clip does not move on A2 at all because it is asymmetrically rippling along with that edit on A1 and V1. Now the last thing I want to show you here is a way to do source record style editing the way you're used to in Avid. Again, we don't have that exact system in Premiere Pro, but I'll show you a way to get pretty close. So here's my editing sequence here that I've been working on, and I do have that assembly where I've pulled in a few more shots and kind of strung them together. And I want to take some chunks out of this assembly and drop them into my cut in progress here. So how do we get all this set up? Well, I'm going to close that sequence. I don't want it open just yet. Here is this edit that I'm working on. So think of this as the record side in Avid. And I'm going to go ahead and go over here to my sequences bin, and here is that assembly that I'm going to use as the source side. And what I want to do is load this sequence into the source monitor. I can right click on it and I can choose open in source monitor right there, or I can simply drag and drop. And this is now that edited sequence in my source viewer. And now I need to get this into its own timeline. So I'm going to click on the wrench right here, and second option down there, open sequence in timeline. I'm opening this sequence from the source monitor, not from the bin. And there it is. This is actually a source monitor sequence or a source side sequence. See how that's playing back in the source monitor, not the program monitor. And you can visually tell the difference because this one has a red playhead here, and the playhead in this other sequence is blue, and it plays back in the program monitor. So you can use this to do, see, I&O like this. and use that to do a lift or extract into the other sequence. But it would be nice to see them both simultaneously, right? So what we're going to do is move this sequence into its own panel. I'm going to click and hold on the name and drag it down one position, not into the center, that's where it already is, but one position at the top. I'm highlighting, the purple highlight is across the top there. I'm going to let go, and now it's split into its own panel, and I can see both sequences simultaneously. All right, and if I wanted to do some very specific match cutting between the two, I could also gang them together. All right, and the playhead's going to move accordingly down below to match. All right, but I don't need that specifically for this, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that back off. What I want to do is grab this section here where he puts his hand up to his forehead. Let me move that in point, bring in all of this and I'm going to cut that in right about here. All right, so I've got the in and out point there, and all I have to do is hit insert, and there it is. It dropped it into my other sequence. Now notice what happened here. It's one clip and it's green. This is a nest, and by default, unless you change it, you're going to get nests when you do these types of inserts and overwrites from other sequences. So to turn that off, because I want all the original clips, right? I'm gonna hit undo. And in order to change that, we want to turn off this switch right here. It's at the end of the timeline panel next to the magnet on the left. Insert and overwrite sequences as nests or individual clips. Well, we already saw the nest. We want individual clips. And I'm going to turn that off. Other source patches have lit up here on the left, showing me that I have all of those available. And now when I do that overwrite, I have all the original clips from that source side sequence down in this record side sequence. So that's how we approximate the source record style editing from Avid inside Premiere. It's a few extra steps, but it is possible. That's it for editing in Premiere Pro. Hopefully this was helpful for translating some of that Avid muscle memory into this new software. And by the way, all the keyboard shortcuts I mentioned in this video are available in a separate document. So look for that. I highly encourage you to use them to set up your own keyboard shortcuts, download some sample projects and media, and just practice editing and trimming in Premiere Pro. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.